you can find out maybe the key to getting your offer accepted in this crazy market. So
absolutely. The one thing I will say, it's my attorney hat comes on, even though I don't practice anymore, is make sure that use and occupancy agreement is written up by your attorneys and looked at by attorneys, because you want to make sure you're covered, that you know, as the buyer and as the seller, but you want to make sure that everything is written up that protects all the parties.
You're not going to have a squatter.
Right, exactly. Thankfully, none of my clients have ever had to deal with that. And my sellers have always been very gracious and great about moving out when they were supposed to. But you want to make sure that you have something in writing to protect you in that regard.
All right. Welcome today to the Real Estate Solutions Lab, where we are your go-to source for tracking all things real estate today. And I'm your host, Tony Cardinali with Cross Country Mortgage. Today, I'm really excited to introduce our special guest, Ruth Berube-Leach, a seasoned real estate broker with Keller Williams and the Stonegate Group here at Westford, Massachusetts. She's got over 15 years now, right?
Yep,
Over
unbelievable.
15 years of experience and background. She's been an attorney in her past as well, and brings that experience plus vast experience in real estate here to residential purchases and sales in the Merrimack Valley. So welcome, Ruth. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a podcast where we like to share solutions to common problems and sometimes uncommon problems we're seeing in real estate. People search for these solutions, and there isn't a lot of information available, especially from experts. And that's why I wanted to start this, to bring on an expert to talk about solutions to specific problems, or maybe solutions to many problems that can be solved with one thing. So I brought up a couple of things that my clients have brought to me lately that I figured we could talk about and sort of tap your expertise on it. And
awesome.
The one that I like to talk about the most is when sellers are concerned about selling their home. Right now we're locked up, right?
Yep.
The market there's no inventory. And why is there no inventory right now? Mostly because...
Yeah, who wants to sell when they locked in at a 2.5% interest rate?
Exactly.
But they're also really afraid that they're not going to be able to find something else to purchase.
Exactly the problem.
So I encounter this a lot with my seller when I'm going on listing appointments. Probably the number one thing I'm hearing right now, which is, I really want to sell, but we're going to ignore the interest rate factor. But people still need to sell, whether they're moving, they're getting divorced, they had another child, they need a bigger house. There's always these other reasons that people need to sell. But they're hesitant because they're worried, well, what am I going to do? I can't find another house. It's taking months and months to find houses. Like, what am I going to do? If I put my house on the market, it's going to sell in a couple of weeks, because that's what's happening. But then where am I going to go? So to kind of reassure them, a couple of options that I offer, or suggestions I offer, I should say, is number one, you can always write into the listing, your sale is subject to you finding suitable housing.
Right.
Now, that's a good solution, but not, I don't think, the best solution, because you're going to be finding buyers who are willing to agree to that, but then they're also trying to lock in their rate. They're trying to close. They're trying to get into a school system before the school starts, whatever the reasons may be. And they're kind of on the hook indefinitely.
Yeah,
perhaps,
you're holding them up.
You're holding up their closing. So I think what I like to see, and I think is a great option for people now, and we've been using it for the last couple of years with this crazy market we've been in, is to suggest a use and occupancy agreement.
Right.
So for those who don't know what that is, a use and occupancy agreement allows you to close, stay in the home for a certain period of time, usually up to 60 days, because if the buyer has financing, they need to get into the house within those 60 days. But it'll allow you to close and still have that additional time to either find a new house, or if you're building something and it hasn't, the construction's taking longer or something, you essentially are renting back the property from your buyers.
Okay.
But it allows you to stay in the home and gives you a couple of extra months to find something. And I usually find that works out really well, because from the time you're putting it on the market, you have a buyer. Again, we're getting them under contract in a week or two usually. But from time they're putting in their offer to close, you've got about 30 to 45 days. You can ask for a 60-day close. That gives you 2 months. And then you close, and then you have another 2 months. So conceivably, they have a 4-month period to find something. And I find that really gives okay, a little room to breathe. I'm not as panicked about finding something. And I think that really helped. I just had this conversation with a seller I have that wants to relocate down south. And they're working with an agent down there is that on the buy side who's saying, you can't put in an offer with a home sale contingency.
Right.
Because that's the other upside. You can sell and you still haven't found something. You can close and then put in an offer on something.
Right.
And
you've got all the money.
Right. You have all the money. You don't have to worry about putting in a home sale contingency in your new offer, which makes you less competitive in this crazy market.
Right. So fantastic.
Yeah.
That'll be a real help. Is there any concerns a seller should have? Like what rent amount would they have to pay back to that buyer?
So, I mean, it's always negotiable. We had one closing recently where the buyer said, you've been great. I got a $10,000 closing cost credit at closing. You can stay for another 2 weeks. No big deal. And it was a short period of time for that. But they were willing to let them stay longer if they needed to. But typically, the buyer is going to want to be getting rent equivalent to what their mortgage payment is.
I figured.
And so that is problematic in some ways because typically these sellers are going to have purchased much lower. They're at a lower interest rate than we are at right now. So potentially that rental payment could be double what they're paying right now in their mortgage. But it'll be worth it to them to have that extra time. But it can always be negotiated.
Yeah.
But,
and I guess it could help them. Now, as a buyer, any concerns? Have you come up against any concerns with the buyer? In fact, they're purchasing a primary residence. I know there's a 60-day clause with lending. You got to be in there in 60 days. How about home insurance? What is the home insurance agent saying in these cases that you're finding?
So they need to get insurance, but the seller needs to have renter's insurance as well.
Yeah.
And then they are requiring sometimes the seller to pay their premium for that time period that they're not in.
Interesting.
They're not in there.
Yeah, so a little leverage passing back over to the buyers there.
Yeah.
But hey, it's a solution to a problem. I think we see it in new construction where people need a little bit extra time and the buyers let the sellers actually, the buyers have an interest rate lock that's expiring. The sellers need a couple extra weeks beyond that. Well, the buyers can let them close and just stay there for a little bit longer. So it's a really neat solution.
It's a nice solution. And, and as a buyer, when you're putting an offer in these competitive situations where you're putting in offers and you're up against 10 other people, if you offer a use and occupancy to the seller, that could be the difference between your offer getting accepted and them accepting somebody else's offer. So it's a good leverage point for a buyer sometimes as well.
So as a listing agent, if a buyer's agent called you or a buyer and said, is staying in the property a little extra longer going to be a show mover for the seller, is that something you'd share with that buyer?
Absolutely. With our sellers, we would tell, I know up front, obviously, if my sellers are going to want something like that.
Right.
So I love when agents call me and say, hey, what's going to make this work for your seller? What can we do? Because there are certain things we're going to put in MLS, and there are certain things we're not. And so if they call me up and say, well, do they have a preferred closing date? Would a use and occupancy help? What if we offer to pay for their, move? I mean, it's crazy the things that get offered now. But all those things, agents, I like when there are some agents that don't take any calls and it's like, whatever's in MLS, that's what we're doing. Don't call me, don't bother me. My job as your seller's agent is to get you the best terms and price.
Right.
So if I can do that by negotiating something great for you with the buyer's agent, then by all means, I'm going to do my best to get that for you.
That's really great. Well, thank you for that. I think that is a great explanation of how a use and occupancy can solve a real estate problem like this, especially with a seller, and even as a buyer, as a competitive advantage. If you've got the wherewithal and working with a great buyer's agent that's going to make those calls, you can find out maybe the key to getting your offer accepted in this crazy market. So
absolutely. The one thing I will say, it's my attorney hat comes on, even though I don't practice anymore, is make sure that use and occupancy agreement is written up by your attorneys and looked at by attorneys, because you want to make sure you're covered, that you as the buyer and as the seller, but you want to make sure that everything is written up that protects all the parties.
You're not going to have a squatter.
Right, exactly. Thankfully, none of my clients have ever had to deal with that. And my sellers have always been very gracious and great about moving out when they were supposed to. But you want to make sure that you have something in writing to protect you in that regard.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Ruth. I appreciate that help very much on that one. Another question that we come up against, or it's actually not a question, it's sort of a problem. In lending, as a lender, I see people bringing properties across my desk all the time that they want to purchase or they're considering purchasing, and some of them are very unique, let's just say. Unique properties have always been a challenge with lending because lenders, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, they like the regular looking house, windows, doors, all the normal looking features, because they think, a lender thinks, hey, day two, you leave the house and say, I don't want it anymore, lender, take it back and get rid of it. It's yours now. I don't want this place. Well, the lender has a problem. They have a problem. They don't want the house. They just want to get rid of it as fast as they can. And if it's a unique property, kind of funky looking, not very appealing to a lot of people, or if it's got defects, physical defects, financial defects like a condominium might have, that causes a real problem. And so we've come up against questions from clients to say, what is the potential that if I buy this and in 5 years, I'm not going to be able to sell it again? And we consider that sort of that future salability question. How do you maybe put clients at ease, whether it's a seller or a buyer, when they've got a unique property or a property with some sort of issues? How do you bridge that gap and bring the buyer to seller together? Or what's the solution to that if there is one?
So when I first meet with my buyers, I talk to them about all the things they're looking for in a home.
Yeah.
And of course, they're not thinking, oh, I'm going to find, like an example we were talking about, a log cabin or, something.
A dome home.
Right. I mean, it's some crazy weird house. They're thinking they're going to find their perfect colonial, 4-bedroom, 3-bath, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But that's not always how it works out. And so I do really stress to my clients when we go through before we look at anything, my buyers, I'm always telling them, look, I'm going to walk through this house with you and I'm going to show you the things that I think are red flags. And that's any kind of damage, any kind of an old furnace, leaking roof, stains on the ceiling somewhere from that. I mean, all those things. But I'm also going to say, look, this seems like it's a great property to you right now because you're kind of desperate.
Yeah. Especially in this market.
This market is crazy, right? But in 5 years, 10 years, you got to think about what's going to happen when you go to sell this. So right now, even properties on a main road, okay? So you're buying in a market like right now, it's on a main road, but it's a nice house, great. You're going to be able to sell it. It's going to sell for over market, over a list price, multiple offers. But if you're not planning on staying there for a certain amount of time, you may not get the appreciation that you want.
Right.
And when you go to sell it, you're going to be in a different market.
That's right. Exactly.
Where maybe we're in a market where things stay on the market 30, 45 days before they get offers. We've been in that market before. And in my career, I should say.
Yeah.
And when you are, that's when you have to think about, did I buy a house that has all the things that another buyer is going to want? Or did I buy a house that is so tailored just specifically to what I want? There's going to be a very limited pool of buyers. So it's something to really think about. Want to look at all those factors. I mean, not that you need to buy a cookie cutter house.
Right.
And if you're planning on staying there, this is your forever home, you're going to be there 20, 25 years. Then it's unlikely you won't have appreciation.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be a challenging sell when you go to sell it, but you won't be selling at a loss. But in this market where we're seeing people pay crazy over $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 over the asking price, and they're waiving their appraisals and doing all this crazy stuff, it's going to take you a lot of time to build that equity. And if you find yourself in a situation in a few years where your job changes or you get divorced or you need to sell, you have to keep that in mind, that you could be taking a loss on a house that has very unique properties to it.
Right.
So it's something to consider.
Some of the things that people have brought to me that I thought could be sort of flagged, if you will, as unique. The condition of the property is easy. Like if it's in really rough shape, that's solvable.
Right.
There's some conditions or issues with a property that, this is temporary. Even some condominiums, they have financial problems, might have some litigation. These are not long-term things. They're going to get fixed by the property if it's the right home for the right time period for you. But if we're looking at things where it is a unique property, like a dome home or whatever the style of home, embankment colonial, something that's different than the rest of the market, that's probably going to be something that could last a lot longer, where you do have to think ahead. Anything else you can think of like that? Those are the things that I had written down. Environmental factors. The house is built over near Devon's. In their deed, they had a unexploded ordnance clause clause in there. Everybody in their deeds had to have something that said there could be unexploded ordnance on your property.
Yeah, that's a little scary. I mean, I'm thinking about maybe you're buying a property right now that is there's a vacant lot next to it, or it's in an area that hasn't been developed yet. What are they going to be putting in there? Are you buying something that later on they're going to put a gigantic condo? You're buying this beautiful home with an acre of land and you think you have all this space, but in 5 years they're going to put up a condo development that everything's jam-packed and you've got all kinds of traffic coming in. I mean, you have to think about those kinds of things and wonder be asking those questions. Have your agent do their due diligence. I mean, sometimes you're not going to know. Maybe there isn't any plan at that point. But if there is, find out about it ahead of time and don't just go buy this piece of property because it looks great and then find out, I look out my window and there's a stone wall next to me and I can't because they've built something there to block you.
I didn't think of that. That's actually a good point. Anything else about future salability that other than work with a good agent, obviously someone that's going to take your future at their heart and give you some advice on that? Anything else you can think of that would be useful for people to know about?
I mean, I think you want to always be looking at, as much as you want a home tailored to you, always be thinking about what is it going to look like to somebody else when you go to sell it? Even with, like, for example, condos. I have clients buying 1-bedroom condos. That's great when you're a single person, fine, whatever. But try to get a 2-bedroom if you can, because you're always going to be able to sell a 2-bedroom easier than you're going to be able to sell a 1-bedroom. I mean, little things like that. It doesn't have to be these great, big, very super unique properties, but, your location. Are you on a main road? Some people like being far removed from everything and not close to a grocery store and not close to a Target or whatever, but other people don't. So these are all things you just have to consider when you're looking at these and look at the big picture. And certainly, like you said, you make sure you're represented by a good agent who knows what they're doing, who's experienced, and who has your best interest at heart and isn't just out there to make a commission.
Awesome. Ruth, thank you so much. This was really helpful.
My pleasure.
I think the information can cross both for the sellers and the buyers. I think both parties can use this information, so I think it'll be helpful. If people want to get a hold of you and your team here at in this area to sell or buy a property, how do they do that?
That'd be great. I would love to help any buyers or sellers in the area. I work in Merrimack Valley. I'm licensed in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. My team is the Stonegate Group, and my cell number is the best way to reach me. It's 617-512-7631, and I'm with Keller Williams, Merrimack Valley.
Ruth, thank you. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks so
I appreciate
much, Tony.
it. Very good.